My mother-in-law casually dropped a surprise on me. We're going to be living together now. We just remodeled the house into a duplex for convenience. Since the property is in your name, right? Emma, could you cover the $80,000 remodeling bill? My mother-in-law and my husband laughed, pleased with themselves. Watching them, I felt a surge of determination. I was about to confront them with a truth even my husband didn't know, along with some evidence. I'm Emma Davis, 26 years old. I live in a quiet, nature-filled area outside the city, working an office job and enjoying drawing as a hobby. Recently, I've been uploading my art to social media, and I love reading people's comments on it. My husband is 3 years older than me, and we're happily married, living in a cozy old farmhouse we bought right after the wedding. But since we got married, we've had a monthly visitor who always brings stress along with her, my mother-in-law. Emma, I'm here. Open up, she shouted, banging on the door. I quickly opened it, trying to smile. Coming, mother-in-law, though there's a doorbell, she never uses it. There are so many bugs around here. Where's George? Still at work, poor thing. Even on a Saturday, I brought him some of his favorite food. She stood there holding a large bag, looking a little annoyed. I kept my forced smile as she chatted nonstop. My husband is her only child, so she feels the need to take care of him constantly. Even after he got married, she even helps me with house chores, like the time she rearranged everything in the fridge, and I had to hunt for ingredients the next day. Before our wedding, my husband told me, if my parents ever need help, we'll live together. I want you to be okay with that. I didn't like the idea of leaving our beloved farmhouse, but I had accepted it. What worried me more, though, was the idea of living with my mother-in-law full-time. 2 years into our farmhouse life, my husband told me that his father had fallen and broken his leg. They need our help now, so let's live together like we discussed, he said. Yes, I think it's the right thing to do. Can I still keep up with my drawing hobby? I asked, worried about losing my free time. I agreed to move in with them, mostly because I was concerned for my father-in-law, but I felt anxious that housework and taking care of my in-laws might take away from my precious drawing time. Whether my husband knew about my anxiety or not, he just said, I want you to prioritize the house, and then left the room to go to his office. Alone in my room, I felt like I had almost given up on my self-centered husband. Looking at the illustrations I'd drawn over the years, I began to reflect on my feelings. Just as I had convinced myself to live with my in-laws, something unexpected happened. While at work one day, I suddenly felt numbness in my hands and feet, followed by intense dizziness, and I collapsed. Thankfully, a colleague called an ambulance immediately, so I was safe, but I was diagnosed with a stroke at a young age. I regretted ignoring my high blood pressure, which I'd noticed during health checks but never seriously addressed. I was told I'd need surgery, rehabilitation, and a hospital stay that would last about 2 months. As my diagnosis sunk in, I took out my phone and called my husband, my hands trembling. All he said was, I see, so I guess living together will be postponed, huh? I was crushed to realize he was more worried about moving in with his parents than about my health. With my father-in-law still in the hospital for his broken leg, there was no immediate need for caregiving, so I could focus on my recovery. Since we didn't have kids yet, there were no additional worries there. Still, I remembered my mother-in-law's constant wish for grandchildren, which she mentioned every time we met. Trying to shake off the thought, I picked up my sketchbook. Between preparing to move in with my in-laws and all the medical tests after my collapse, I hadn't had time to draw. I realized that once I started living with them, I'd probably have even less time. So, I decided to treat this hospital stay as my last chance for some freedom and fully enjoy my hobby. Once I was out, I promised myself I'd do my best for my husband and his parents, whether with housework or anything else. The 2 months passed quickly, and soon it was time for me to leave the hospital. My husband casually asked if I wanted him to pick me up, but I wanted some time alone, so I declined. As I sat on the bus, watching the familiar scenery go by, I realized I was close to home. The sunlight sparkled on the green leaves, and I felt a bittersweet sadness, knowing I'd be leaving this beautiful, peaceful place soon. Since my in-laws' house was closer to the city center, I knew my life was about to change dramatically. Feeling a bit sad, I slowly got off the bus at the familiar stop. As I walked toward our old home, I suddenly froze in my tracks. The charming, old house I loved was gone. In its place stood a completely unfamiliar, remodeled house. Since I'd been in the hospital for 2 months, I wondered if I was confused about the location, but after checking the nearby buildings, I knew I was in the right place. There was no mistake. Feeling unsettled, I nervously pressed the intercom. My husband's voice answered, "Yes?" Recognizing him, I replied, "It's Michelle." A moment later, he opened the door, looking casual and slightly disheveled. "Ah, welcome home. You're back sooner than I thought," he said, sounding relaxed. "I could have picked you up today. I had the day off." "George, what happened to our house? Why does it look so different?" I asked, barely able to hide my shock. But George just looked at me blankly, saying, "Huh? What's up? What do you mean?" Then I heard laughter coming from inside. Dread filled me, and I walked past George, heading toward the living room. Opening the door to the unfamiliar living room, I saw my mother-in-law lounging on the couch, laughing at something on the TV. She looked up and said, "Oh, Michelle, welcome back. Those hospital stays are so long, aren't they?" "Don't worry, I took care of the house while you were gone." My heart sank as I asked her why the house looked so different. Without a trace of guilt, she explained, "Well, since we're all going to live together now, I just remodeled it into a duplex to make things more comfortable." The phrase, "just remodeled it into a duplex," kept echoing in my mind. My mother-in-law was always interfering in our lives, but I never thought she'd actually remodel the house without asking. Weren't we supposed to move in with her and her house closer to the city? She always complained about the bugs and the distance from the station here. But now, she smiled and turned off the TV, leaning in to say, "Oh, there's something else important to tell you. The remodeling was a bit expensive. Michelle, the title of this house is under your name, right? Sorry, but could you cover the payment?" She laughed without a trace of regret. "It's $80,000. Her words hit me like a punch, and I felt my legs shaking. I couldn't even respond. She just stood there smiling, and at that moment, my husband walked in. I rushed over, hoping he'd understand my shock. I told him what his mother had said, desperate for his support. But his answer was as cold as ever. "Well, that sounds right. Go ahead and cover it, okay?" That was it. This was the same man who cared more about living arrangements than my health when I had a stroke. He always went along with whatever his mother said, never questioning her. The frustration I'd been feeling toward him flooded over me, and I felt completely done. From the bottom of my heart, I knew I was ready to leave this family. "George, I understand now," I said. "I'm going to divorce you. And, Cecilia," I added, looking at my mother-in-law, "you can take care of the renovation costs on your own." I turned to leave, but they weren't about to let me go so easily. My husband sneered, "Fine, I've been losing interest in you anyway, but remember, the house is in your name, so you're responsible for the payment." "Yeah, leave if you want, but pay your dues first," my mother-in-law added smugly. Their selfish demands shocked me. I couldn't help but sigh. I refused to turn around, knowing I'd see their smug, satisfied faces. Standing tall, I replied, "You both keep saying the house is in my name. Did you forget? The ownership was transferred to you, George." I revealed the truth to them, but they only laughed, assuming I was lying to avoid paying. That's when I reminded them that George had asked me to transfer the property title to his name when we got married, saying he didn't want the house to be in his wife's name for appearance's sake. I didn't care much about it, so I'd agreed and transferred the ownership to him. Their smug laughter stopped instantly, and I could see panic setting in. "I don't remember asking for that. And you don't have any proof," George said, trying to deny it. Anticipating this, I calmly walked over to an old drawer, pulled out the property document, and held it up to their faces, pointing to the line that showed George's name as the owner. My husband's face turned pale. "That's fraud. I can't believe you actually did it," he stammered, realizing the $80,000 remodeling bill would fall on him. His sudden anger disgusted me. Realizing a calm conversation was impossible, I said, "We'll communicate through lawyers from now on." I turned to my mother-in-law and added, "Cecilia, your son seems to be in quite a bind, so please take care of him." Ignoring my husband's yelling, I left their house for good. Afterward, my husband tried calling several times, but I didn't respond. Everything was handled through my lawyer, and given our already strained relationship and issues with his mother, the divorce went through smoothly. My husband's claim that the name change was fraud was dismissed since it was proven that we had agreed to the transfer 2 years ago when we got married. My lawyer reassured me that it was entirely legal. It turned out they had intended for me to cover the remodeling costs immediately after my release from the hospital, an effort to burden me financially at my weakest. Instead, since the house was under my husband's name, he was responsible for the bill, essentially trapping himself in the end. I also received alimony as part of the divorce settlement. burdened by the large payment he now couldn't avoid. George either borrowed from risky lenders or found himself struggling with debt. While I was dealing with my husband and mother-in-law schemes, I received an apology from my father-in-law, Bob, who was still in the hospital with a broken leg. He messaged me, saying, "I'm sorry for my wife and son's behavior." I could tell that Bob wasn't directly involved, but he had still ignored his wife's and son's treatment of me during the 2 years of our marriage. After replying briefly, I made up my mind to cut all ties with that family and move on with my life. Since then, my health has gradually improved, and I was able to go back to work. During my marriage, I used to draw carefully, always worried about my husband's reaction, but now, I can dive into my art freely, anytime I want. What started as just a hobby has turned into a career. People now reach out to me with job offers through the social media site where I post my illustrations. I now spend more time drawing for work than just for fun. Today, I'm on my way to visit an old farmhouse in a small, rural town. My dream now is to buy this house with a mix of my alimony and savings, then open an art studio there. As I ride the bus, looking out at the scenery, I remember the day I left the hospital, a day that changed everything for me. The beautiful natural landscape around me looks just as it did that day, but my feelings are completely different. I'm filled with excitement and hope for the new life ahead, and the sunlight streaming through the trees makes the leaves look so bright they're almost dazzling.